Welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I'm going to be addressing an inner archetype that feels very alive for me. I've been going through an initiation with my inner sacred rebel, and it's still very poignant. It's still very I'm still kind of in it. I'm just starting to make my way out of this death spiral that I've been in over the past week or so. Really, it's been my whole life, but over the past, I would say 4 or 5 months, it's been deeply activated. And in the past week, we kind of came to this crux. I went into the eye of the tsunami. So with that being said, I've done a lot of other episodes like this where I'm like, this is what's alive for me right now. And I'm just going to share it and see what comes through. And these episodes tend to be a bit vulnerable, and they tend to be very passionate and sometimes a little bit messy. So I'm asking y'all for some grace in that, but just really excited to share what's currently happening for me right now. So to start off, what is a sacred rebel, right? And I have this beautiful oracle deck. If you're watching the video, this is like the booklet that comes with the oracle deck, but it's the Sacred Rebels Oracle by Alana Fairchild. And I first found this oracle deck at my dear friend Chloe's house, who Chloe has actually been on the podcast. Funny enough, she interviewed me on the podcast. Chloe is an old friend and someone who I feel so met by, and she's also just such a rebel. And so anyways, I went to visit her about, I think this was a year or two ago, and she had this Sacred Rebels deck on her kitchen table, and it just really landed with me. I've always really resonated with the rebel, but this specifically was it, right? So anyways, I bought it and I've had it for all of that time. And as I was preparing for this episode, and really through this week, as I've kind of been going through this initiation with my rebel, I've been sitting with this deck and I've been pulling cards from the deck and getting my messages. So I wanted to read you guys just the introduction, because she really addresses what is a sacred rebel very clearly. Sacred rebels know that even if something has always been done in a particular way, a better way can always be found. Sacred rebels question the way things have to be. They dare to dream of a healthier world based more in love than fear, where it is possible to live your dreams, manifest your heartfelt visions, and life is nourishing rather than a constant struggle or drain. Sacred rebels believe in love and just defy those that say you need to live in the real world. Sacred rebels are living in the real world. Theirs is a world of love, possibility, individuality, and freedom. Sacred rebels refuse to be put down by those who are frightened of being truly alive. That's kind of the end of this introduction part, but I'm going to read just a little bit more. Sacred rebels are obedient only to their spiritual passion and individual values. The sacred rebel wants to live a life that is unique as this suits them in their temperament. So anyways, there's a lot more here, which I could honestly just do, I think, a podcast episode where I'm reading aloud her words because they resonate so deeply with me. But that being said, I get to be vulnerable and authentic with you guys and share how this particularly relates to me. So with that being said, God, I'm a rebel. I've always known it. Not always, but I think that, in my upbringing, it became very clear that I was a little bit of a black sheep. I was a little bit different than the others in my family, than the other girls in my school. And that inherently comes as well from growing up in a pretty conservative culture and just not really buying it, And so that was always a part of me. And, being a rebel, I think that we often consider being a rebel as acting out, right? Or just very insistently rebelling. And I actually am curious. I'm going to look up the definition of rebel and see what it says while we're here. A rebel is a person who rises in opposition or armed resistance against an established government or ruler. Okay. So it tends to have a more aggressive definition, right? And in my opinion, to be a rebel is not inherently coming from an aggressive place. It's not necessarily acting out. My rebel is like purely my existence. Like just by being myself, I am contradicting the common narrative and therefore rebelling. And I love this part of myself. I love this part of myself that, is so rooted in my truth, this like very discerning part of myself that like it's just foundational, even when it means like triggering someone else or going against the crowd. I will do it because I'm willing to put myself at risk of, being chastised or being left behind or being cast out because my truth is that valuable to me. And some of you guys listening might be like, ooh, you know what? I feel like I'm the same way. Yeah, I've been there for sure. And others might be like, ooh, like, you know what? Like I follow the crowd a lot and I could actually like call some of this sacred rebel in. And I just want to say this episode is for both of you, both of these types. And maybe you fall somewhere in the middle as well. Because what I'm going to be addressing in this episode is where I've also recognized that there's a little bit of shadow with the rebel and how I realized that and how I intend to move forward in my life. So, where do we go next? As with all archetypes and all ways of being, there is a shadow. Just like over giving, like being a giver, right? It sounds great, like the giver, let's put her on a pedestal. But in reality, oftentimes the giver is actually sacrificing their own health and well-being. And that's the shadow of that side, right? Or let's see what else, or what other archetypes could we explore? Let's talk about like the badass boss bitch, right? Like, fuck yeah, look at her going after it. But what part of her life is she not taking care of? How are her relationships looking? Where is she out of balance in that? And what is her motivation? What is her intention for that? Is it just for money and glory and power? Or is it coming from a place that is empowered in purpose, right? So like with every archetype, good or bad, objectively, there is a shadow and there is a light side. And in Tantra, we kind of say there is no good or bad. There is no right or wrong. So I became acutely aware of my shadow over the weekend with this stuff. And basically what it comes down to is when you are activated in your rebel, when you are quote unquote acting out, or when you are being yourself in a way that, or in a place that is likely to activate others or lead to a consequence, there can be some shakiness at times. And we will often find out whether consciously or unconsciously, whether we are able to hold those consequences. Meaning when I trigger the reaction of someone else, am I solid in my foundation enough to do it in a way that is respectful and compassionate, while also advocating for myself and my truth? And whether their reaction is positive and welcoming or more abrasive and demonizing or demeaning, am I willing and able to hold the consequence of what happens with that? Will I take on their projection or will I not? Will I hold the rebel to her highest, or will I allow her to get angry and frustrated and throw a fit because she's not being seen. So I'm not new to my rebel, and I'm not new to the consequences that she creates. And I think that there's also this like innate piece of the inner rebel that kind of likes the drama and kind of likes the like, how are people going to react to my like truth, you know? And that's an interesting thing to consider. And I also feel like I'm one of those people who, excuse me, just having a sip of water. I'm one of those people who would rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. I'm not sure if you guys know that phrase. Like, I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission and be told no. So I'm willing to do something that I'm like, I don't know if I can do this or not, but I'm just going to do it and hope that it's okay. And if it's not okay, then I'm going to like own it. But at least I got to do it, you know? And that's like a foundational, like ethical question, right? And it's not like I'm like that with everything, of course, but there are times and places where I'm more like that. And it's really funny because Andrew's more the opposite most of the time. And so we get in it on this. And I love it. I think that we're perfectly matched for that. So anyways, there's a bit of naivete that comes with that perspective though as well. So I'm just going to give a little brief background as to like a couple of experiences with the inner rebel and what it means to hold the consequences versus not hold the consequences. So I've been in this leadership training container and it's amazing in so many ways. I've learned a lot. And it also is a very one-dimensional container. They have one way that works, right? And I'm going to go back to this writing by Alana Fairchild, the very first sentence. Sacred rebels know that even if something has always been done in a particular way, a better way can always be found. So when I'm in a container where it's like, this is the way, this is it, and they have evidence that it's tried and true and it works. When I come in and I'm like, yeah, just because it works doesn't mean it's the best way. And I have my way of doing it. And actually, it's coming from a place of a lot more ease. It's coming from a place of groundedness. It's coming from a place that to me is more honoring the humanity of myself and my team and everyone that's involved. So this container, while produces amazing results, again, it's very masculine. It's very much teaching individuals how to take radical responsibility to get things done and to create momentum and to collapse timelines in their lives. It's really about building that structure, holding yourself to your highest. And that's something that I'm already kind of good at. There was definitely room for improvement. And I think that this container kind of sharpened that sword for me. But at the end of the day, it was something that, you know, I felt very familiar with. And in actuality, what I needed more was permission to trust myself rather than to trust the process that they have. And what I needed more of was finding the prosperity in it all. There was another sentence that Alana says here, but anyways, we'll continue here. So yeah, that created a lot of tension for me in this space. And it kind of led to, like, over time, like we kind of got to the end of the rope, or like, you know, it kind of led to this little bit of a clash between the two perspectives. One that I had that I knew to be true, and one that they had that they knew to be true. And it's their container, right? Like they have all of the ability to hold that through and to stand on that. And they put me in a leadership position. So I was going to lead in the way that I knew to be best for me, that honored me, and also honored the people that I was then given the opportunity to guide, right? And I felt that my way of doing things was not welcome. It was met with resistance, and it was like they were forcing their way upon me, and it just didn't feel right for me. It just didn't feel right. And basically, because of my way of being in it, my decision to follow through with my values and stand in my truth regardless of all costs, I was then taken out of that leadership role. And at the end of the day, guys, to be honest, I'm super fucking busy. I've got a lot of shit on my plate, and I love that. And I've got a lot of responsibility already, which is part of the reason that, this container is amazing for people that are building that in a way. And I'm already there. And so in reality, it was kind of a gift that I was like, all right, well, now I have this responsibility off of my plate, which is great. And this is where it shows that I couldn't hold the consequences, because instead of being like, well, that's their loss. They just lost an amazing person in leadership, and this is better for me anyways. I'm just going to trust the flow of it, whatever. Instead of that, which would be holding the consequences, I got super fucking triggered. I got so triggered, y'all. I got so triggered. And we've talked about my perspective of triggers on this podcast before. I'm actually just pulling up. I have like new modern definitions for words. And so my definition for trigger is an invitation to heal, an opportunity to gain new perspective or clarity, potential awareness of how to love and accept yourself more fully, an initiation into your highest self. So they gifted me this trigger, right? They gifted me this trigger because there were other moments in the container where I rebelled pretty much the entire time. There were definitely some things that I followed along with, but in the other moments where I shared my truth, it was like, whatever, I share my truth, no big deal. They were like, we don't agree with you. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to take what I can out of this experience and keep going with it, because I am getting something out of it. But I'm not going to make it mean anything about me because I don't agree with them. But when they took me out of leadership, well, that became a personal attack for me. I made that true. That wasn't what they did. I don't believe that was their intention at all. But I made it I made it mean that I'm a bad leader. I made it mean that I'm not worthy of being in leadership. I made it mean that I'm a bad person because of the fact that I don't agree. And that I need space and I need a day off and all these things. I went from one end of a pendulum of self-righteousness of like, how dare they not buy into my more quote unquote evolved perspective, a more multidimensional view of leadership. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the self-deprecation, this like, hitting myself over the head, bad, wrong, unworthy, all those things. And what that showed me was that my foundation of self in this way was not strong. It was very shaky. This led me directly to an unhealed part of myself that I got to make love to and realize like where I was putting my worth, where I was allowing this container to define my worth, which is hilarious because from the beginning, I was like, I don't really align with this container fully. There's great things in it. I've gotten a lot of transformation. And honestly, like the level of transformation I've gotten has been more because of how they've triggered me in these ways of the things I don't agree with than in like their actual program, which is part of the intention of the program. And there are other programs like this as well. I'll say ISTA is kind of similar, although I align with ISTA way more. And I've talked heavily about how much I like ISTA. And but ISTA comes from a similar perspective of like, we're going to trigger you. But I feel that their triggering is a little bit, their triggering invites in more sovereignty. they teach sovereignty. They teach you how to get connected with the truth of yourself, how to trust yourself. And this other container that I'm speaking of does not do that, in my experience. So anyways, I don't think that it's a bad thing to go into a container that's triggering you. Again, I think that it's a gift. I think it's a huge gift. But it's also important to kind of get clear on, you know, what is there for you in that. So anyways, yeah, basically the beauty of this trigger, which was totally unintentional on their part, was that it really zeroed in on like, holy shit, there's this part of me that really wants to be perceived by this traditional container as like a good person and as like a worthy leader, which is funny because to me, they throughout the process have kind of represented like societal standard and the patriarchal culture that we have, not like holistically. And again, this is my, like how I've projected onto the container. I'm owning that like this isn't like what they're standing for or preaching. It's my projection. So it's funny that this thing that I teach very clearly about like breaking free from, I'm still looking for approval from. What? deep down, deep in there. And I get to let that go. That part of me gets to die. And I get to love that part of myself. I get to approve of that part of myself, which I do, but there's a part that I didn't. There's a part of me I realized that was still judging my difference, my difficulty, my rebellion, right? So this was like a big piece of shadow work for me. It was a huge piece of seeing like, ooh, I've been projecting. I've been unconsciously letting my rebel take the front seat, which I also don't inherently think is a bad thing. But when I'm not in a mature relationship with my rebel and my rebel has not been matured, that's where it's a problem. Like, even though my inner rebel is true and I'm happy that I stood for my values in this container and I didn't bend to their will. And I'm happy with how I responded to them in the communication that I did. I think that it was all very, very good, very in alignment for me. And yeah, I'm all there for it. But she doesn't get to take, just because she's true and right, doesn't mean that she gets to take the driver's seat by default all of the time, anytime she's activated. She gets to consciously be seen, heard, and loved. Because if she's not expressed consciously, she will make herself known in this circumstance, for example, and we may or may not be prepared for the consequences. In this experience, the consequence of my rebel coming out was me being publicly taken out of leadership, which felt demeaning for me. And then I made all these stories about it, right? So I wasn't prepared for the consequences in this. And I'm going to drop here, just like I'm going to take a little pause. I want to share a couple of resources to go deeper here on shadow work. So first one is discovering your golden shadow. So to me, the inner rebel is like such a golden shadow. Golden shadow is like the part of you that you're not seeing, that you're not owning, that you're not integrating, that is actually like a gift, right? So check that out. And a couple more. That's episode 103, by the way, discovering your golden shadow. So let's see what else we have here. I also want to share episode 25, which is sexual shadow work. So that's more focused on like the sexual pieces. And then the last thing, let's do episode 75, which is a third eye chakra guided meditation, which will help you trust yourself and trust that inner rebel. And then one more, sorry. Episode 117 is instinct versus intuition. So getting very clear on like, what is the difference between those? So those are a few more like further resources. I'm just dropping them here now for you guys. But anyway, so basically for me, this was like a big opportunity of like trusting, like initiation into trusting myself and also an initiation into loving myself. So So that's kind of what happened. And this realization of like, can I hold the consequences of my inner rebel? No, because there's another part of me that's not mature enough to hold all of that, to come from a really strong, grounded, firm foundation of self. And I get to like make love to that. And I'm so grateful that this container was so triggering for me in that way. So that being said, I want to share an example of what it can look like to hold the consequences of your rebel. Because usually I'm kind of good at it, kind of really good at it. So this story has been shared on the podcast before, but it's one of my favorite stories. It's one of Andrew's favorite stories of our relationship. So at the beginning of our relationship, Andrew and I were dating for like 2 months, and he invited me to go to church with him. And I hadn't been to church in like 12 years, probably. And I was like, not really wanting to go to church, but but I could tell it was important to him. And I also noticed that the resistance within myself had more to do with fear of being like, I don't know. I have my things with the church, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do. I've talked about that in depth on this podcast. At the end of the day, I actually like really love and am down with Jesus. I think Mary Magdalene's like such an OG, like pleasure priestess woman. So I actually felt like it was a healthy growth edge for me to go ahead and like give it a go, to go to the church with Andrew. So that day, we're getting ready for church, and I'm like getting naked in front of the mirror, and I'm like, do you like my outfit, to Andrew? Like God made me this outfit, this like birthday suit. And we're both kind of laughing at this joke, and it's all silly and fun. And then I go to actually get dressed, and I felt really called to wear this like red strappy like priestess dress. If you go on my Instagram, you probably won't have to scroll very far to like see me in this like dress. It's like red and strappy. And it makes me feel like a priestess. And I'm like, if I'm going to go to church, which to me is like a temple, then I'm going to dress like a temple priestess, obviously. And I didn't really think that much into it. It just was like, this is what I'm wearing. It was like intuitively like came through me. I grabbed it and I was like, great. All right, I'm ready to go. So I step out in this, and Andrew was not impressed. In fact, he was like super fucking triggered. He interpreted my choice in clothing as disrespectful to him and disrespectful to the church. And he's like, you're testing me. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. Like, it's not conscious, but yeah. My inner rebel was, my rebel was like, can you hold this? Can you hold this type of woman who's like gonna wear what she wants to wear and be herself? So he's, worried what people will say about him or think about him with this slutty girl on his arm, right? And like, the dress isn't objectively slutty, but it is a hot dress, and it's, like, I mean, to be fair, like it's not something that like my grandma would be like, put on that outfit, but I'm me. So anyways, like truth be told, like as I was getting dressed, I was like very naively picking out this outfit. I wasn't thinking at all about the repercussions or the consequences. Just like in this group that I'm in, this training, I wasn't, when I like made my decision of how I would lead. And I'm just going to share briefly. Basically, I wanted a day off in this training. They gave me a week to be in leadership, and I said, Saturday, I'm going to be offline. And that was kind of what was the catalyst to me being taken out of leadership, is because they were like, you can't do that. And I was like, well, when I agreed to be the leader of this, I wasn't told that I needed to be available every day. And this is breeding codependency. And I think it's actually more empowering to show people that they can achieve all their goals while also being well-nourished. And they have a whole other team of people that they can go to. But anyways, I didn't think about the lashback that would happen. I was just like, if they're going to argue with me about taking a day off, like that's really fucking stupid. It's like, I didn't even give it much thought, because like, it sounds so silly. So anyways, and also they have the reasons for doing it that way, and that's totally fine. I want to acknowledge, like, I think that there's like a genius to that as well, like pushing people to their edges. I think that that's great. And like, it just doesn't work holistically, in my opinion. It's my perspective. That doesn't make their perspective wrong, though. I want to be clear. So anyways, getting back to the story at hand. Yeah, so I very naively picked out this outfit. I didn't consider how it would make Andrew feel. I didn't consider really anything. I was just like, I'm just going to be myself authentically. I'm going to be that, whatever that means. Again, it wasn't me acting out. It was just me being myself. But that's the shadow of the inner rebel is being naive to the potential consequences. And so when Andrew kind of had this really triggered response, he was really frustrated at me. He was kind of not yelling at me, but he was showing a lot of emotion in his trigger, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. He's allowed to have his feelings about it. He's allowed to be triggered. But when that was happening, of course, I was like, this could be the end, and it wasn't something that I was like, deep down, I was like, we're going to figure this out. We've been triggered before. We've always figured it out. We have a commitment that out is not an option. We're going to find resolution on this, whether it's today between the two of us, or we need to go see someone professionally or whatever. But this is an inherent part of who I am. And, love and acceptance is a big piece. No one's perfect. No one's perfect. And also we kind of pick our perfect partners to bring up our shit and trigger us into growth, right? And it's you got to find that person that you feel safe enough to be triggered around, to hold you in that. That's one thing that Andrew and I do immaculately, if I do say so myself. So anyways, he has this reaction, and it's all right, am I willing to hold the consequence? I didn't think about it beforehand, but as it was happening, I was like, okay, here's the consequences. I've upset my partner pretty intensely. And this could be a deal breaker for him. It could be a deal breaker for me. I mean, we've only been dating 2 months. I know that we're very committed already, but who knows, And at the end of the day, I knew deep down that I was, committed to the, sorry, I'm having some problems with a wire here. That I was willing to hold the consequences of that. And I was able to hold the consequences of that. It might have hurt really. Okay. So it depends on the level of the consequences as well, because the consequence in that moment was his reaction. And I was able to hold it because I was able to stay very centered. As he was angry at me, I really didn't say much. I was like, I'm being myself. I acknowledge that this is hard. I acknowledge that, it feels like a personal attack. I acknowledge that this is not how most women would act or be. I acknowledge that I'm a little bit difficult in my rebel, but this is who I am. And we're going to church, and church is all about loving everyone. So I don't even want to be a part of a church or go to a church that you're this worried about seeing me in. But I don't think it's about the church. I think it's about you. And that's what I said something along those lines. And, he was, well, we're not going to church anymore. So, okay, I'm going to church. I was like, I'm going to go by myself. So I ordered an Uber. I left him behind, sitting at his computer screen, to consider where God landed in all this for him. And so off I went to church in my pleasure priestess garb. And, again, the ironic thing about all this is these church people claim to love everyone and forgo judgment. So in truth, my outfit would give these individuals an opportunity to practice what they preach, right? So as I walked into the church, I noticed a few sideways glances in my direction, but nothing more or less than I would expect wearing the same outfit in any other public establishment. I looked great. I looked hot. I looked beautiful. So, anyways, but also, no one shamed me for my clothing, nor did they compliment me. It was just kind of oh, okay. So I didn't really make a scene. I just walked right in, and I quietly took a place in the back of this very packed church, because as it turns out, that was their highest attended service yet in the history of the congregation. So it was so full that they literally had to close the doors, and they had a crowd of people watching the sermon on TVs in the lobby. And I had just luckily snuck in with the last few worshipers and sat in the very back. And again, like this was my first time going to church in nearly like 15 years. So it was very emotional for me. It brought up a lot. I had a lot of like fond memories and not so fond memories. I cried. I actually really enjoyed the sermon. I resonated with nearly all of it. I especially enjoyed the music and the singing. I was crying. And the only thing that didn't land for me was in one of the songs, they said something along the lines of, "We are not worthy of God's unconditional love." And I was like, hard pass on that one. But there were lots of other really great things. And so it was perfect. So anyways, the sermon ends. And as I was sitting there, I noticed that like Andrew had texted me a couple of times, but I was like, I'm going to be present. I'm going to focus on the sermon. Like I get to have my experience at church and be here for me right now. And not allow myself to be swayed by this drama. So I'm just going to be here and we'll have our resolution after, or maybe not. Like, I don't know. I didn't know. He could have been messaging me like really pissed for all I knew. So, I just didn't, I let it be. And at the end of the sermon, I walked out to see Andrew, my fiance now. Back then he was just a man, just my boyfriend. I walked out to see him standing there waiting for me, his eyes like watery, just like saying sorry without having to say, I'm sorry, kind of energy. He pulled me into his arms and we left together. And so holding my truth really initiated us both that day. I was able to hold the consequences of his reaction, knowing that my truth was grounded in expansion and love and truth. My truth was grounded in truth. And it actually worked. It really, he understood me better. I understood him better. We got to know each other better. We became closer. He respected me more because of it. He said that it's one of the things I love most about you is that you will be yourself no matter what. Like you're committed to being yourself more than anyone I've ever known. More than I'm willing to, he said. And I was like, yeah, it's very true. Sacred rebel vibes. So anyways, yeah, I was willing to hold the consequences. And what's the worst thing that could have happened? The worst thing that could have happened is we could have broke up from that. That could have been like too much for him. I could have been too much for him in that moment. And at the end of the day, I'm willing to hold that consequence as well. If he couldn't see the value in me being my authentic self, if he couldn't see the value in my rebel, then it probably wouldn't work out long term. But in this case, he was able to come to that truth. He was able to see, you know what, actually, this is on me. This is on me. This is my conditioning. This is my ego. This is, yeah. So that's an example of being able to hold the consequences. So, yeah, the thing about this sacred rebel piece is that she's a little bit dangerous. She's a bit fiery. And it's exciting. There's a little bit of a drama to that. And that's one thing that I've noticed is maybe also a part of the shadow. There's the shadow piece of the naivete of like, oh, like not thinking, not realizing how different I am, not owning how progressive I would wager my way of being is, and not acknowledging that everyone is ready to buy into that perspective, and not acknowledging that some people might be really a no to it as well. And am I going to take it personally that someone is a no to it? And in some ways, yeah, I did take it personally. I think that's just human, but it's one thing to take it personally for a moment and then come back to the result of I'm valid and worthy, and this is all true for me, and I'm good with that. And there's the other option where it's like you go into a shame spiral of I must be bad because they don't like me or they don't agree with me or whatever it is. Another way that I've experienced the sacred rebel is like in group dynamics, especially, and that's definitely what happened in this circumstance, is like activating that sacred rebel and then having the sacred rebel shut down or chastised or just not met or seen with love can bring up unresolved issues about being valued or seen or heard. I had a similar experience in, actually, it was an ISTA level 2 training where I kind of did an activity a little bit differently. And I was very much celebrated for it, which is great. Again, another reason why I love ISTA. But in my small group, I had the opportunity to share about it. And I shared that I wanted to read my journal because I journaled all about the experience. I just like felt like, oh, I want to read this journal to my group and have them see me in this. And my power group leader was like, don't read from your journal, speak from your heart instead. And that fucking pissed me off. Because I felt like it was an attack on my inner rebel. I felt like she wasn't being seen or heard or validated, and that wasn't true. I could have just been like, I hear that that's your request, but I'm going to do it this way. And I'm certain she would have been like, all right, well, whatever. But instead I got actually very upset about it. So it's another piece of that immaturity coming through. And that it's not wrong to be immature. It's just like, this is the process of growing up, and that's what we're all doing. And so there's this piece of me that gets to grow up, and I'm here for it. So yeah, in those group dynamics, like when you're collaborating with others and you have that like going against the grain energy or like having a different perspective, it can bring up those feelings, those unresolved issues. And you get to decide at what point are you being respected in that? Are you, even though they have a different view, are they still going to respect your perspective? Are they like honoring you in that? And that doesn't necessarily mean they just take your perspective and run with it, but like just getting really clear on like, is this the right space for me? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. One way I've described the current relationship or the current experience I'm going through is like having this relationship with like a toxic partner, right? And like I can say I've had many exes that I would define as like toxic relationships or trauma bonds, and that's going both ways. Like I was also the toxic one in many of those cases. But yeah, like let's just say like in any relationship, even though there was toxicity, that doesn't mean that I wasn't getting value out of it, because there were also amazing things about that person in that relationship that were like getting me closer to the North Star of lifetime partnership that I desired. And there were also things that were super toxic that were helping me learn, like even the things that were bad and wrong, it's like, okay, like this is telling me like where I'm not showing up for myself, and where like, why am I enabling this kind of behavior from a partner? What does that say about me? And so I'm even getting value from the toxicity, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily continue relating with them, even though I'm learning from their toxic behavior or the behavior that's just not a non-negotiable for me anymore. Right. So, and I've also had relationships with individuals where I'm like, I'm clear that like, we're not in alignment long-term, whether or not it has to do with their toxic behavior or just like our visions not being in alignment or our like growth mindset not being on the same page. I stayed in those relationships at times because I felt like there was more juice to squeeze. There was a little bit more that I could get out of learning from that relationship. So I stayed because intuitively that's what I felt. And I'm really happy with that decision. And so that could be the decision that I make with this container that I'm currently in. Or it could be, this like, what, actually, it's just like, there's nothing more for me here. It's actually just like too toxic, or it's just not in alignment. It's not in resonance. I don't even necessarily like to use the word toxic. I think just not in alignment or not in resonance is more neutral. So anyways, so you get to decide that when it comes to those group dynamics. I think being censored is another big one. Like, I've dealt with this a lot, and I have so many friends and co-creators that have dealt with this as well. Like when we're talking about nude bodies and sexuality, even if we're doing it from an empowered place, and even when we're doing it and we're actually following the terms of a space or a container, I'm specifically talking about Instagram. Being censored on Instagram is like a huge thing for us in this space. And even if we're following the rules, sometimes we'll get censored, which is super frustrating. But to me, when that censorship comes up, the new progressive definition I've given to being censored is this clear sign from the universe that you are doing the work your soul came here to do. It is an initiation into your highest self, and by that token, a cause for celebration. So to me, like, you're listening to your intuition, and listening to your intuition is one of the highest forms of self-love. And it is also a divine rebellion in the same token, because we live in a world where we glorify putting our trust in institutions that profit off of our blind obedience. So from a young age, we're kind of brainwashed to look to the government, to look to religion, to look to our parents, to look to our elders, to look to our teachers, and all of that for our truth. And while these sources, in my opinion, mostly mean really well, and they're doing the best with what they have, that doesn't mean that they're like, they get to trump your truth. You get to take all of that information and then make an informed decision based on the outer evidence as well as your intuitive guidance. In a world where healers and those who followed their intuition, have been chastised, have been killed, have been hung, people like Jesus and witches and Joan of Arc and Galileo, they were all publicly persecuted because they were rebels, because they were following their intuition. So it's just something to kind of be aware of as you're working with the inner rebel, and really making love to her and being like, how can I see you more clearly? How can I invite you in a way that is empowered and mature? So for me, some of the takeaways that I've gotten from this is like, okay, first of all, I get to be more aware of like the consequences of her coming out. And that's not to say that I'm not going to make the actions that I've made, because by and far I will do them, but maybe it means approaching it differently. Like, maybe it means, instead of just like putting on that outfit and just like prancing up to Andrew as if nothing is wrong, which there wasn't anything. And like, again, like I was naive, and that just is what it is. But now that I know that that's a thing for him, in the future, I get to be like, hey, I get that this like might be a thing for you. So I just want to address that, and I want to honor you for that. Whatever the circumstance might be, and kind of sharing my come from, rather than just doing it in such like a bold way, right? Maybe, and maybe not. I do think that there's a time and a place to just be like, this is it. And not all spaces allow for the time and the awareness to come at it from that angle, but that's a potential. And it's also potential of like considering, where do I want my rebel to come out? And in this container, I was actually very careful about that. I honestly was silently rebelling for a lot of the container and just quietly taking what worked and leaving the rest. But in this circumstance where I was put in leadership, it's kind of hard to be a leader and be silently moving, And so that was something that, I got to work with. And I had that opportunity to be strong in that. So yeah, and there's also this thing of getting really clear on like, okay, I'm about to rebel, which means that I might be chastised, I might be cast out from the group. Here's the worst case scenario, and am I willing to hold that? And most of the time it's going to be a yes for me, but being prepared for that trigger, or knowing like, this might bring up something like, instead of just going into it and doing it and then being like, how dare you question my way of doing things? Like, that didn't need to happen. I didn't need to feel so caught off guard. So those are some things to be aware of with that. And that's a big, big piece that comes with this work. And I want to also acknowledge that by and far, for me, being rebellious has been, it's been mostly met with compassion. It hasn't created any super damaging effects, but there's also this thing where like, sometimes you're just like planting the seeds. You're planting the seeds for people. And to speak into that a little bit more, like, not everyone is ready to claim their power and take radical responsibility. Not everyone is going to be where you are in their evolution of self. There's still a lot of people that are bought into the narrative of society. A lot of people are still bought into third dimensional, you got to work till you're almost dead to have success and results. Whatever the story is, not everyone's going to be bought into your perspective, whether or not it's objectively higher vibration. Sometimes you're going to like truth bomb some super insightful wisdom, and that's going to kind of fall flat. Sometimes it's going to like be a potential to shatter limiting beliefs and shift timelines for people and to like literally rock their world. But just as often, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And it can feel like it's so easy to take that personally, to like invest so deeply and to care so much about someone because you see what is possible for them, but then have them just like be like, not for me. I'm going to go with what's been working. That's kind of limiting, but whatever, or whatever, you know? And in this case, I like to say, like, you know what? All you're doing is planting a seed. And that's our duty. It's not your duty to watch and to wait for that to grow. Sometimes like holding that attention, holding that attachment to the result is the exact thing that strangles it. It's kind of like overwatering a plant. Like you want to plant the seed, give it some water, and then back the fuck off. Because if you overwater that seed, it's going to drown and it's never going to come to fruition. So it's also being aware of that with your rebel too. How attached are you to the result? Because we're all expanding at our own pace, and it may take some seasons or even lifetimes for that seed to take root. Right? And you get to plant that seed, and then you get to go find someone that's in the same spot as you, that's like riding with you, or that inspires you to grow even taller. Right? So that's just something to be aware of. And with that being said, like I've done that. Like I'm so grateful that in this experience of like going through this past week, like I'm so fucking grateful for the people that I have in my corner. And I'm going to give them a little shout out. So first of all, Andrew's just amazing. And while he's done this container and he was the one that really encouraged me to step into it. And so he could very easily be taking it personally that I'm like not having an amazing time right now. He's like, I'm actually proud of you for really sticking up for yourself. And I think you should finish, but I love you. And I love exactly everything that's happening for you. So giving him that shout out. Another one I want to give a shout out to is my therapist. She's amazing. She's also she was an ISTA facilitator as well. That's how I met her. And she's a therapist as well. And she has her own containers. Just for, I don't know, it just feels right for me not to like share her name blatantly here. But if you're interested in her, feel free to send me a message and I can hook you up with her. But she's great. And she also pointed me in the direction of, she suggested before I have a clearing with the leadership of this container that I have an EFT session, which EFT stands for emotional freedom technique. And so she connected me to this beautiful shamanic woman who kind of allowed me to get clear on what was interfering with my ability to meet that clearing from a really grounded place. And yeah, so that's the thing. Like, look, like when you're not finding what you need in a container, if you're not feeling met, if you're not feeling like called forth in a way that feels expansive, then like don't fucking take it. Go find someone that does. And that's what I did. That's what I found. I'm really grateful for that. And I want you to know that like I'm here for you in that way as well. I'm so fucking here for you. I'm so fucking here for your sacred rebel. I'm here for the triggers. I'm here for the empowerment. I'm just like, I'm here. And so with that being said, I really want to just like share some of the offerings that I have that might be supportive for you if this whole episode is landing with you. So the first thing really is the business magnetism mentorship. That's a one-on-one mentorship. You can find that on my website. Everything that I'm about to share, you can find at talktantra2me.com, specifically under the Work With Me tab. But that's a really great one where you have like direct access to me and I'm able to kind of hold space for things like this and other things that might be triggering or that you might be moving through, especially with business. Like when we bring our light to the world, like we're gonna trigger people. In fact, if you're not triggering people, I would question whether or not you're being authentic, like truly to your deepest, like, truth. To me, like the fact that not everyone agrees with me is like, okay, that means that I'm like really in it. I'm in it and I'm in it for the right reasons. And I'm willing to be censored. I'm willing to say the things that others aren't willing to say. Right. So that's something that I highly recommend. The Sacred Intimacy mentorship is also amazing. It's a more personal mentorship. It's less focused on bringing your purpose alive and more focused on like finding a lifestyle that's like truly built on liberation and expansion. And very soon, probably by the time this episode comes out, to be honest, I'm going to be launching. I have 2 other group programs in the works. So if you're looking for something that's more community driven and is at a more approachable price point as well, I recommend you check out those. So one is going to be a pleasure priestess training program. So if you're interested specifically in coming into like work with sacred sexuality, Tantra, shamanic work, that's the container that I recommend. And then another one is going to be more about stepping into prosperity. I'm not sure. It might be called Turned On by Prosperity, but it'll be something around prosperity and wealth and like having enough of everything and like moving beyond abundance. Like abundance is great, but abundance just means a lot of things, right? And so this container is going to be about like, what does it mean to have everything you desire in the right balance, right? Because abundance can be like a golden cage in a way. So that's going to be a great one as well. So keep an eye out for those. They'll be coming out probably in summer. One will probably come out in summer 2023 and the other will come out in fall. I haven't felt into the yes quite yet of either one of them, of which one will be first, but stay tuned. So definitely recommend checking out those. Also, the in-person events are just a great way to like get into, again, that community that's like on your vibe. So also on the website, talktantratome.com /events, or just click the events tab and you'll see like retreats coming up, play parties, Tantra yoga, Lingam workshops, all the things. So, yeah, that being said, I just want to express my gratitude. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for holding space for me and my movements. I'm so grateful for this space and so grateful to have this, and to be heard in this way. And thank you for opening yourself up to the idea of sacred sexuality and these more shamanic realms. So yeah, with so much gratitude and love, have a sexy and spiritual day. And we'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta.